Let's say you have both, a Mac and a PC, both of which you use daily, but you only have a single monitor that you need to then switch between the two computers. Now, the traditional analog way of doing this is to use the monitor's built-in KVM switch, but honestly, those, let's just say they leave a lot to be desired, right? Which is where these come into play. So, a while ago, I've made a video about the KVM switch that I used at the time, which is this one right here, and a surprising amount of KVM manufacturers saw it and reached out whether I'd be interested in reviewing their, let's say, attempts. And I say attempts here quite deliberately because the majority of them seemed unable to meet all my requirements, which we'll get to in a second. But for those of you that don't know what a KVM switch is, here's a simple explain like I'm 5 version. So, your monitor is usually connected directly to your GPU or device with a video output, but if you need to connect said monitor to multiple devices with an option to switch between their outputs quickly and often, then it's the KVM switch that you plug in between and let it handle the switching and the traffic between whatever device you want to be active at any given time. There's all kinds of desktop KVM switches out there, the most common one being a 2-device single monitor switch, which means you can connect 2 PCs to a single monitor. However, there is a catch. You see, HDMI and DisplayPort are two vastly different protocols, which means you'd need a fairly complex device to convert between the two, which is why most KVM switches only support one or the other, but almost never both. This is not an issue for the most part, because most manufacturers make the same version of the same switch for either DisplayPort or HDMI, so you just pick the one that both of your devices that you need to switch between use and be done with it. Now, up until this point, I've been using this KVM switch, which is the Connect Pro UDP2-12AP, and as you can see, is a dual system, dual monitor KVM switch. If you haven't seen my review on it, I urge you to check it out. I'll leave a link in the description below, but the main reason for me buying it was the fact that it supports 4K at 144 Hz, and what's equally important, well, at least for me, it supports G-Sync. It's been serving me well enough, I guess, which is why I've been reluctant to try anything else, but then the folks at Tesmart reached out with an offer I couldn't refuse, right? This is their DKS 202-M24 switch that, according to the specifications, is exactly identical to the one that I already have. This episode is brought to you by PCBWay. I've been working with them on my custom keyboard project and I was super impressed with their speed, quality and price, so I'm more than happy to recommend them to anyone who needs any kind of PCB manufacturing done, whether it's just for a couple of prototypes or if you need a larger production run. Link to their website, of course, down in the description. Back to the video. So why did I agree to review it then, you might ask? Well, because it's 30% cheaper than the Connect Pro. Actually, scratch that. The Connect Pro, if you look at their website, costs 500 euros. Then add another 100 or so for shipping to Europe, because you cannot purchase it here. And then add another 150 or so for import duties, which means we're looking at more than 750 euros, which is twice the price of the Tesmart switch. For this kind of difference, you can get a secondary monitor, and a good one at that. Now, if you're thinking, wait, is that it? Is that the only difference between the two? And the answer to that is, yes, it is. I've had nearly identical experience with both of them. However, there are some caveats to both of them you have to consider before getting one. With Connect Pro, I've had some weird behavior if I plugged my Mac Studio to it directly with a Thunderbolt to DisplayPort adapter cable. And by weird here, I mean occasional flickering or the inability to select higher refresh rates in Mac OS. Like the max I could choose was 100 Hz, I believe, despite the fact that the website says up to 144 Hz. I haven't had this issue with Tesmart. I just plugged the adapter cable into the switch and it started to work perfectly as if it was plugged into the display directly, with one exception. The maximum refresh rate got reported at only 120 Hz no matter what I tried or did, despite the fact that I'm using a 4K 240 Hz monitor. This is not a big deal for me because 120 Hz is more than good enough both on my Mac and on my PC, and in the games that I do play, I normally strive for graphical fidelity rather than frame rates, so I normally configure my games to run at around 100 frames per second, which at 4K, this switch has absolutely no problem delivering, with G-Sync working flawlessly. That said, if you need 240 Hz, I'd probably just bypass the KVM switch with a separate cable and select it on the monitor's GUI when needed. I get it, this approach kinda defeats the purpose of having a dedicated KVM switch in the first place, but that's the unfortunate reality. It's a trade-off. Do you want max performance or do you want the convenience of a single button to switch between the two or more devices? Because unfortunately, you simply can't have both. At least not yet, I guess. Now, since we're talking about performance, one thing that needs to be not only mentioned, but heavily emphasized is that cables in setups like these matter way more than you might think. In fact, I'd argue that if you have any issues with a KVM switch, well, provided the switch itself is working properly, it's 100% the cable that it's fault. It's 100% the cable's fault. And with setups like mine, or should I say any setup that needs a KVM switch, there's a ton of cables. Because first you have two video cables from your primary device, say a PC, then you have two video cables from your secondary device, which in my case is a Mac, and then you also need USB cables so that all your peripherals also get switched over, and so on and so forth. It's a total cable nightmare. I'm currently building a new home lab while we're waiting for the prototypes of the 10 gigabit router we're developing, and it was only because I pretty much took everything apart that I agreed to check this KVM switch out in the first place. And yes, once the home lab is fully done, I will make a video on it, so go ahead and subscribe. You've been asking about it for quite some time now, so I think it's more than due. Anyway, as you can probably tell, apart from the price, the Tesmart switch is also much smaller, but doesn't come with any kind of rack mount support, so keep that in mind if it's important to you. In my case, I have it sitting in a tray on top of my rack, and given the rack is tucked below my desk, it all kinda worked itself out, right? So, does that mean that the Tesmart is the new king of the hill when it comes to dual system KVM switches? For me, absolutely. It does everything I needed to do, and it took no more than a couple of minutes to set it all up. And now that it's up, I'm never touching it again. Well, except for putting it back once I'm done shooting this video. Tomasz from Slovenia, signing out.